This is the DawgNation Post-Game Show, live from the UGA Bookstore in Athens. Brought to you by Kroger, R.S. Andrews, Jittery Joe's Coffee, Sir Gerald's, J. Stein Law Firm, and the UGA Bookstore. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Hello, everybody, and welcome into our DawgNation Post-Game Show. We're live here at the UGA Bookstore, where Georgia has gotten a 45-3 win over Ball State, a game that just concluded moments ago, and we are happy. I'm going to be very honest with you here for a moment. I'm just happy to be live for a change, because over the last couple of days on DawgNation Daily, we've had a couple of issues with that, but today, for reasons I won't bore you with, we are able to be live, and we are able to talk. I could hold up the score of the game, let you know that we are in the flesh, in living color, and happy to be with you after what has been admittedly a little bit of a rough ride here over the course of the last couple of days. That means on today's show, one of the things I'm going to do a lot, something I have not been able to do in person with you for the last couple of days, I'm going to read a lot of comments. We're going to react a lot to what goes down with Georgia and its win against Ball State. I'm going to give you a few thoughts that I had as far as how this win played out. Jeff Sentell is going to stop by. I have confirmed this with Jeff like 3-4 times. You come to the post-game show? You come to the post-game show? Jeff said yes, so we're going to have him live here in just a moment. Now, I'll also give you one more kind of housekeeping note, and then we'll kind of dive into the conversation. Normally, for our DawgNation Post-Game Show, we're also thrilled to be able to take your calls via Zoom. Once again, for reasons I won't fully bore you with, we're not going to be able to do that here today because of all the issues that we've, of course, been dealing with. But we'll get back to doing that again very soon, and we'll have plenty of your thoughts. Now, as we told you last week, our good friend Kaylee Manziel is on hand at the bookstore here right now. So if you want to be on the show, you can come on over and say hello to Kaylee, and Kaylee will get you lined up here in queue. We'll kind of do like we always do. We'll get you on. We'll get you off. We'll give you a chance to weigh in, share your thoughts on Georgia football. We'd love to have you be a part of our show here today. And obviously, you would imagine we have plenty of things to say about this. You know, overall for me, I think there are probably 5 takeaways that I had for Georgia's win against Ball State. I'm curious to hear what yours are, but ultimately those are, you know, my kind of thought, my kind of vision on this about what we just saw play out. I'll give you 5 quick takeaways on this. Starting with, if you listen to Friday's DawgNation Daily, the one thing that we said at the time was, hey, I don't have a really, robust expectation necessarily for this game. I didn't necessarily have that last week either. You know, typically speaking, the best version of Georgia seems to come against the best competition that plays. Obviously, UT Martin last week, Ball State here this week. That's not an example of that. That's not the best opponents that Georgia will play. And so sometimes it seems like even in this national championship era, you've gotten less than Georgia's best in those kinds of games. Last year they showed you that's fine, that this was a Georgia team fully capable of turning on the switch when it needed to, when it took on Tennessee in November, when it faced LSU in December, when it took on Ohio State in the Peach Bowl, and obviously we all remember what happened against TCU in the national championship. They showed their ability to play at their best when they obviously needed to. So getting too worked up about what may have happened last year against Kent State or last year against Samford, that ultimately ended up not really being all that important. And so I think I've kind of had the same idea in place for UT Martin last week, for Ball State here this week, which is that I'm not really quite so sure for the good or the bad, anything all that important, all that significant is going to play out in a game like this. Last week we talked about some reasonable, somewhat meager expectations even for that game. I'd say for the most part, Georgia kind of accomplished those, even though it wasn't always necessarily a thing of beauty. We had said coming into this game here today, hey, as just a kind of a basic level set, as the most basic, realistic of expectations, could Georgia possibly get off to a faster start? Well, ultimately, the answer to that question, I guess, is probably no. This was still scoreless after one quarter. So that thing of, is Georgia going to be able to get off to a faster start in this game? Are they going to be able to flex, build the big lead quickly and early? Today they weren't actually able to do that. But ultimately, I don't think that ends up being a negative for Georgia in this game. I think, if anything, I think what you saw is after that little bit of a slow start, where really Georgia had the ball twice in the first quarter, I think you saw the potential impact of the quickened pace because of the clock rules, of the clock not stopping after first downs, things like that, that the first down actually evaporated here pretty quickly. But after that first quarter was over with, I think Carson Beck once again settled down. And I think you would say that Carson Beck today had a much better day than he probably had, last week against UT Martin. I'm not really sure what the overall stat line ends up looking like for this. In fact, let me check this out and see, just out of curiosity. So numbers-wise, it's going to be a little lower, 283 yards, threw for 294 last week, but he does throw 2 touchdowns. There was an interception, but that's not going to be put on Carson Beck's hands, that particular interception. So I think Beck today was more settled, was more comfortable. I think we got a better version of Carson Beck today than we probably got last week. And so I think that Carson Beck took another step here on this particular Saturday of kind of becoming the quarterback in full, kind of becoming the guy, this team, for this quarterback for this team. He seemed more settled, and we'll keep watching that. On DawgNation Daily a couple of times, what I've kind of called for is at a certain point, Carson Beck needs to sort of have his what I've kind of called a Stetson Bennett against UAB in 2021 moment. That's when Bennett threw 5 touchdowns. And I don't know that we fully appreciated this at the time, but looking back on it, it was obvious at that day, record-setting performance, that Bennett was showing you what he's capable of, that Bennett's showing you what he has the potential to be able to do, had the potential to be able to do in this Georgia offense. Success leaves clues. That was a hint on the part of Bennett for how good he could be. And I don't know that we've quite had that moment as of yet for Carson Beck, but I believe at some point in time in the month of September, Georgia needs to have that from Beck, and I believe at some point in time here in this month, Georgia will get that from him. So one of my key takeaways from this game today is I felt like the offense was more settled. It probably wasn't quite what I wanted it to be at the beginning of the game. Seeing Georgia come out of the block with a very fast start, at a certain point, you'd kind of like to have that. You did not have that today, but I think the overall story for the offense was a positive one. Moving on, my second big takeaway from this game today, the second thing I think we learned today is that Makai Muse has now graduated from being kind of a cool story, a walk-on who finds a place in this team. Makai Muse has now graduated to being, I think right now, a real weapon for Georgia, especially in the special teams. You saw his kickoff to begin the game where he gave Georgia great field position. Now, Georgia didn't really do much with that opening kick to begin the game, but you saw Muse showing that off, and then he has the punt return touchdown. That's something that Georgia has not done since Isaiah McKenzie in 2016. Been a long time since Georgia had a kick return like that, a punt return, I should say, for a touchdown. So you are reminded of just how big of a weapon Makai Muse has a chance to be, and this is going to be incredibly valuable for Georgia. Even when he's not taking a kickback for a touchdown, setting Georgia up for more positive field position. The punt return game has just not really been a big part of Georgia's arsenal the last couple of years. Georgia has been a little bit safer when it comes to punt return, trying to secure them and trying to let a good offense and good defense do its thing without, too much risk necessarily on special teams. But Muse gives you a chance to do more than that. And he's obviously also a capable wide receiver for this team, too. We got a hint about that. You want to go back a few weeks ago when Kirby Smart was talking about Dominic Lovett, who we do believe is going to be a very big player for Georgia this season. Lovett, who transferred to Missouri after having almost 900 yards receiving for the Tigers last year. When Kirby was talking about Lovett, he was mentioning Makai Muse in the same sentence. So that was the indication that you probably needed for how good Muse could possibly be. And once again today, you kind of saw that he really asserted himself from the word go. And I think through a couple of games here, Makai Muse has not only been one of the fun Georgia stories, I think he has certainly arguably been one of Georgia's best players. Now, another note I'll give you here in terms of what I think we learned from this game. Are you like me? Do you maybe want to see a little bit more from Dylan Bell at running back? Is that something you wouldn't mind possibly seeing just a little bit more of? That's a guy who kind of gives Georgia something in that position that I think it probably needs. I'll tell you what Bell sort of looked like to me a bit here is a little bit of what Georgia has recruited for its 2024 class. You think about guys like Dwight Phillips. I don't believe that Bell probably runs straight line and quite as fast as Dwight Phillips does, but Georgia has made a concerted effort to get kind of more athletic with its running back position. I think that Dell McGee has been an incredible success story as part of this 2024 recruiting class. 3 big running back commitments. All of them bring their own degree of athleticism to the table here. And I think that what Georgia is recruiting to bring in for 2024, I think Dylan Bell showed you some of that on the field here today right now. I think there's an extent to which Georgia fans might like to see a little bit more of Dylan Bell at the running back position, giving you that extra dynamic weapon, trying to be as creative as possible for all the ways that you can use what Georgia's able to do. So those are three of my early takeaways here on this. Three things I think we learned from Georgia today. I've got a couple more that I want to give you over the course of our time here, but I also want to give you a chance to have your voice heard too. If you're here at the UGA bookstore, you're going to be live on the show. We'll give you a chance to do that. Kaylee Manziel, get you lined up right over here. You can walk over. We'll get you on. We'll get you off real quick. You'll have a chance to kind of weigh in and speak. We'll give you a chance to do that here today. Also, we'll read your comments via Facebook and YouTube and all the DawgNation.com, all the traditional methods for talking to folks. We'll give you a chance to do that here today. And Jeff Sentell going to stop by and see us here today, too. Would you like to be on? Come on over here. Yeah, come on. We'll have some folks start lining up here. We'll get some folks on the air. We'll give our friend here a little space to kind of move in. We'll find out what you have to say about this. And while he's getting in place, I'll also remind you that our DawgNation Post-Game Show is live here at the UGA bookstore. And we got folks right now. They're all over the place shopping down there. The national championship, the back-to-back national championship gear, it's all there at the UGA bookstore right now. Nike, Peter Millar, Vineyard Vines, Johnny O, the coach's gear, all the stuff that you see good-looking Georgia fans wearing all the time. The best place to buy all of that is right here at the UGA bookstore down there on the first floor. And if you're leaving the stadium, come on by and see us. We're up here on the second floor. We'd love to have you stop by and be a part of our broadcast here today. Now, we got a Georgia fan who wants to weigh in here. Tell everybody your name and what you thought about the game here today.
My name is Vincent, and I thought we were a lot cleaner. Like you said, I'm not really worried about the slow start because I think we play up to our competition. But what I really like to see the most is our punting game. We haven't had a dynamic punting game in a while, and it's just fantastic to see. It was right in front of me. I was right there, and it was awesome. It was great.
On DawgNation Daily, some of our commenters, because Brett Thorson's from Australia, the terrific punter, they call him the booming onion because he obviously has the Australian flair there and certainly a big leg. And when you think about, Thorson, but also, what Muse is able to do, this is a pretty big day for Georgia on special teams. You do have the missed field goal. I guess that mars it somewhat. But other than that, a pretty big day for Georgia on special teams today.
Absolutely. And we look at all three phases of the game. You need all three phases, and I thought we did pretty good on all three phases. So this is a good start for the whole season, I think.
Yeah, I think the most important question now is, do you think Georgia's now ready for SEC play and then South Carolina coming in next week?
I think we are. Beck seemed very composed. I loved his completion rate, so I can't wait to see what he does against South Carolina.
Thank you for stopping by and being a part of the show. Appreciate that. Good Georgia fan weighing in. We always appreciate that. When you're here at the UGA bookstore, you can come by and be a part of the discussion. We're always happy to have you as a part of that. And I told you, we wouldn't go very long today without me also kind of taking your comments the traditional manner there, too, because we haven't had a chance to do this too much as of late. So I'm going to pop over, find out what some folks are saying on YouTube and Facebook and everywhere else. So we'd love to hear you, have you share your thoughts, and we'll hear from Jeff Sentell coming up in a little bit there, too. And, of course, we'll be able to give you our DawgNation Player of the Game here in just a little while there as well. So busy afternoon from us here live at the UGA bookstore, where Georgia fans are weighing in about a 45-3 win over Ball State here today. All right, let's check in and get some folks here. A lot of folks weighing in on YouTube. MG shouting out Cash Jones. Yeah, we thought Cash Jones, had the nice, play, had the chance at the touchdown there. So Jones kind of showing you what he's about right here. Blake Freeman also mentioning Dylan Bell, saying he looked good. Yeah, I'm reminded of a lot of what Terrence Edwards has said about Dylan Bell. That Bell coming out of high school kind of had that look a little bit like a wide receiver who could be a running back. He kind of had that vibe for you a little bit, brought that extra beef. And I think one of the things that Georgia has done, both with Brian McClendon as wide receivers coach, and some of this possibly even predating McClendon a little bit, is I think they have varied the body types and the styles of players they have in that running back room. You have guys who I think bring the size dimension to the table. You've got guys who bring the straight line speed. That's obviously what an Arian Smith or a C.J. Smith probably brings to the table. You think about Dominic Lovett coming in, kind of the classic slot receiver. Makai Muse sort of probably fits the bill on that too. But Georgia is varying its body types in its wide receiver room. That versatility, I think, gives you a lot of value. And Dylan Bell sort of shows you some of that too, that he is the wide receiver who kind of reminds you of a running back, and sometimes that means he can actually play running back. But obviously, go back and look at Kearis Jackson's career. I think he employed this to great success too. that when you have that running back build, that extra physicality, the ability to kind of body up a defensive back and get in front of him and create a target for yourself to catch the football, that's obviously an incredibly valuable thing. Waylon Harper says on YouTube that he wants to see more from Brock Bowers. And, Kirby Smart spoke directly to that last week. Bowers ended up winning our player of the game presented by the J. Stein Law Group because of the success that he had. But Georgia acknowledged, Kirby Smart basically openly admitted, that they could have thrown it to him every single time last week. They could have done that every single time this week. That Georgia wants to see what else that it has. And plus, it wants to get other people involved. Now, when you play the biggest games of the year, Bowers was a huge part of the national championship game, for instance. Brock Bowers at that point, yeah, you better believe he's going to be fed. He's going to get his touches. Georgia, especially this year, this is the last chance Georgia really has to use him. But in a game like this, I don't know that Georgia wants to push the easy button with Brock Bowers much more than it necessarily needs to. Kirby talked this week about the fact that there was nothing held back from the offense or anything like that. Ultimately, a lot of that ends up just being semantic differences. That ends up just being, true based on however you choose to describe it. We know, though, that if Georgia wanted to kind of line up and keep feeding 19 over and over and over again, not only could Georgia do that, it would likely, work to the tune of great success. But in games like this, Georgia also wants to get other guys involved there, too, both from an evaluation standpoint, but also, I think, from a little bit of a team chemistry standpoint there, too. Waylon Harper also mentioned the fact that Georgia right now doesn't have much of a pass rush. I was talking to Jeff Sentell on the field about this. I was actually down on the field for the game today, as you can probably tell. I'm kind of a little bit of a disheveled mess today, pretty probably sunburned, hair kind of all messed up here. So I got baked down there on the sideline during the game today. But one of the things that Jeff and I were talking about was the fact that right now these quarterbacks are getting the ball out very quickly against Georgia. And it's interesting. Last year, I would have told you, if you'd have told me before the year began last year that Georgia would only going to have, 35, 36 sacks in the season, that's by far and away the fewest of any team to win the national championship in the college football playoff era. That is just not a very large number of sacks necessarily. But what you saw from Georgia, which was a little bit of an interesting, asterisk to this discussion, and it's a caveat we're going to come back to over and over and over again, that while Georgia, from a season-long standpoint, did not have a dominant pass rush last year, and perhaps the quick release of quarterbacks was a big reason why, teams just not giving Georgia a chance to come after them, the truth is that when Georgia really needed to have a pass rush, it had an outstanding one. They clearly got after Hendon Hooker in a huge way last year in the home game we all remember against Tennessee. And even in that Ohio State game, where admittedly it was not the best day for the Georgia defense overall, even in the midst of that, Georgia still sacked C.J. Stroud 4 times, and it was that pass pressure getting after Stroud, getting him on the ground, that I think, those small number stops that you did get in a game of inches, that ultimately ended up being the difference between a win and a loss there. So I'm a big believer in pass rush. I'm a big believer this team needs to find a way to create as much of it as it can. I think you especially need that in your biggest games, and next week will be one of those tests in SEC play to see how much of that Georgia is able to provide. A few more YouTube comments here, then we'll take a couple of other comments and other spots there as well. Jay Shipes, thanks for the kind words. Jay saying he watched us last night on Peachtree TV with our call of the Milton win against Roswell. Jay, I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Honestly, I'm thrilled to be a part of that each and every week. Love working with Rusty Manziel and Kaylee Manziel and the entire team from Score Atlanta, Craig Sager Jr., of course, the entire crew that puts that on. That is a real thrill for me to be able to do great high school football and see good players play and get a chance to kind of roll over to Athens after that. So, Jay, it means the world to me that you would watch it because I really enjoyed being a part of that. Thank you very much. I'll come back over to YouTube here in a moment. I also want to check in on the Facebook commentary and find out what folks are saying over there. We'll get Jeff Sentell here coming up in just a little bit, too. We'll announce our player of the game. If you're live here at the bookstore with us, if you want to be a part of the show, pop on over here with Kaylee Manziel. We'll get you on here. We'll give you a chance to react. You can laugh at me from my somewhat sunburned face and my slightly disheveled look here. William Camacho says, taking a page out of the Aaron Rodgers playbook, RELAX. Relax, he says. It's not the end of the world. Kirby coaches this team very well, and this group will get better. And, yeah, along the lines, William, maybe the Facebook comment section looks a little bit different, but the general vibe that I got from Georgia fans leaving the stadium is, hey, this wasn't perfect, but it was a better performance than it was a week ago. Georgia has been kind of in the preseason portion of its season. So, I think for a lot of Georgia fans, this was about trying to find some shade, enjoying a chance to bring kids. I'll tell you a story along those lines, William. I had to go back to my car at halftime today just for something, and I heard two different dads saying to their kids they were leaving at halftime, and it's amazing how it was the exact same comment from a very similar dad to a child twice in a row of, hey, did you enjoy that first Georgia game today? Basically saying, we came for a half, we're out of here. That's what this game is. It's a chance for young kids to come in, perhaps maybe the only game they'll get a chance to come to. For those who maybe don't get a chance to come as much as they might like, it's a little bit more of an affordable ticket price. This is a chance for people to experience Georgia football and, say they were here in the stadium. I don't know there's a huge evaluation that's really capable of being made in a situation like that. I just don't think that's necessarily what you do here. But of the evaluations I've heard, and I try to talk to Georgia fans kind of around the field during the game, at halftime, and walking over here for the post-game show, the sense that I got is actually Georgia fans are actually pretty positive today. And there was admittedly a little bit of a negative bend to some of the chatter last week, probably rightly so for the most part. I mean, I didn't think last week was too big of a deal either, but if you're going to choose to be critical of a game, I would say last week's performance probably opens the door for a little bit more of that than probably this week's possibly did. But the overall feeling I think you've gotten from some Georgia fans here is kind of a mostly positive feel, but perhaps we're seeing a different version of that on Facebook. Rodney White and Allen talking about Georgia not being ready for SEC play. So this is one of my takeaways. I've told you I had sort of 5 things I think we've kind of learned from Georgia in this game. I gave you 3 of those a little earlier. The 5th on my list, and I'll go ahead and respond to you with that right now, is I think the 5th thing we learned today is that this is a team that desperately needs an SEC opponent. South Carolina comes in next week. You can say, well, based on the way that Georgia played the last 2 weeks, they're not ready for South Carolina. They're not ready for SEC play. But y'all know this. The vibe is completely different next week. It's 3:30 on CBS. There's a little bit of a rivalry feel to all of that. We were led to believe that Kirby Smart probably doesn't like Shane Beamer very much. I'm sure Shane Beamer probably feels the same way about Kirby Smart, that we're kind of led to believe there's a little bit more energy in that stadium next week. And keep in mind, the last couple of years for Georgia against South Carolina, Georgia has absolutely throttled the Gamecocks. I talked about this on DawgNation Daily last week, on Friday, that if you care about something like the fancy stats, the analytics, stuff like that, not only was Georgia the national champion a year ago, but some of the number crunchers will tell you that if you kind of judge these teams on kind of a per-game basis, based on all kinds of mathematical formulas I can't necessarily explain and understand, they'll tell you that, hey, the 3 best games that anybody played a year ago, Georgia against Oregon, Georgia against South Carolina, Georgia against TCU. So when you compare Georgia these last couple of weeks, I think you're comparing it to what you saw in the most recent game that Georgia played to end last season for a national championship against TCU, and you're comparing it to this time a year ago when Georgia was playing those big-time Power 5 opponents 2 weeks in a row. Oregon in kind of a nationally known Week 1 matchup, South Carolina kind of a fun sort of middle-tier SEC rivalry, and Georgia came out through 2 weeks and played better than anybody. But here's the thing you got to remember, guys, is that after Georgia went on that just demolition derby for 2 Saturdays in a row to begin the season, we didn't see that version of Georgia again for a while, okay? We didn't see it against Kent State. We didn't see it against Samford. They dadgum near lost against Missouri. So from that standpoint, I don't think it's fair to say that the team we've seen the last 2 weeks is the same one we're going to see on Saturday a week from now against South Carolina. I think history is our guide here. I think history shows us that a very different version of Georgia shows up next week because that's what Georgia's been doing. Now, by the way, if we're standing here at the UGA bookstore next week and that's not the case, if a game in which Georgia has dominated this opponent 2 years in a row, if it's a little bit closer, if Georgia's sloppy in that spot, well, then at that point in time, I think it becomes fair to have the conversation you're having right now, which is this team right now does not quite look like the 2-time national champion. This is a team that's got a lot of work to do. And if that ends up being the case, that may not be the end of the world either. You got a long season to kind of figure all that out. But my guess is in the first real measuring stick game of the year, I believe Georgia's going to be ready to pass that test next week. And frankly, I think it comes at a good time. I think Georgia fans are sick and tired of playing these kinds of games. UT Martin, Ball State's not much better, even though technically it's an FBS-level opponent from the group of 5. Honestly, I'm not quite so sure that Ball State's all that remarkably better than what UT Martin was last week. that you want to kind of fast forward past this. You want to get to something that feels a little bit more like real football in SEC play. Next Saturday, South Carolina Gamecocks coming to town, TV on CBS. You definitely have all that going for you. That's going to be a good thing. Kevin Cook brings up a good point on Facebook, and I think this is worth discussing. I think the most significant negative for Georgia, the most significant eyebrow-raising thing from the first 2 weeks, one of the only things that I would say is kind of translated from week 1 and week 2, I don't know that this offensive line's played a great game yet. I don't know. Now, the caveat here is, they have been substituting a lot. You had Jared Wilson some today at center and at guard, and you had Dylan Fairchild in, which I've heard nothing but good things about him. I think they're getting him ready for the chance to play some more. But, they are rotating a lot with the offensive line right now. But, there were a couple of moments, and you could look, and that's one of the things you get when you're on the field. You get that vantage point of that Ball State defensive line, and this is not a giant defensive line. This is not an SEC-level defensive line, and Georgia today with the chance to just stand there and maul them, didn't necessarily do that. So I think it's a fair criticism. Once again, the assumption I have is that this group's going to play better, and I think for those of you who are regular, listeners, viewers to our broadcast, you'll know that I've been prepared for this Georgia offensive line to perhaps be the number one strength on this team. But last 2 weeks, that has not necessarily been the case. So that'll be a group that's in the spotlight probably a little bit more going into that game with South Carolina next week. I think it's a really good comment. Mark Cole asking about the Zoom calls. So, Mark, we mentioned this off the top of the show, and I'll tell you again here right now. We have obviously had some major issues in our studio, and the last couple of days on DawgNation Daily, we have not been able to do the show live. We're actually going to have to probably pre-record it on Monday there as well. So as a trade-off for being able to do this show live, we are missing the chance to do our Zoom calls, and I apologize for that. I won't bore you with the technical reasons why, but we were not able to do that. We are going to take some comments live here at the UGA Bookstore from those who want to pop by and be a part of the show. So if you're here and want to be on the show, you're free to step on by here. We'll give you a chance to do that. But as far as our regular Zoom calls go, we're not going to be able to do that. But as a special treat, we're going to have Jeff Sentell. He's going to stop by and be a part of the discussion here in just a little bit. And hopefully by next Saturday, I really do feel confident, guys and gals, that everything's going to be cleared up and taken care of and ready to go by next week at this time. But unfortunately for right now, that's just not necessarily the case. I am enjoying seeing the nice images from today's game on the screen as we talk, though. Appreciate Michael Carvel for getting those there. Adam Butts also reminding us here on Facebook of perhaps a little bit of extra motivation. It seems amazing. The last home loss for Georgia took place in 2019 at the hands of the South Carolina Gamecocks back when Will Muschamp was head coach for South Carolina. There were a couple of things that just sort of seem like they happen in a different dimension, in a different universe. Georgia losing to South Carolina like it did that day is certainly one of those things. It has been a long time since we've seen Georgia lose any game of any stripe at Sanford Stadium, and obviously we've gotten used to the last couple of years seeing Georgia barely lose at all, and to think they lost in kind of disappointing fashion to the Gamecocks that day. Thankful we've been able to put that as a distant memory, those of us who are Georgia fans, but obviously a lot of the Georgia fans will never get tired of seeing UGA beat up on South Carolina because of the way that South Carolina fans kind of try to tear up the hedges and really just sort of behaved like a team that did not have very many big wins in its program history. That's frankly how Gamecocks fans behaved that day. And for a lot of Georgia fans, they will never forget that, nor will they forgive. And so they're going to be out for a measure of revenge next Saturday. And I don't mind that as a little bit of extra motivation. Let's get a couple of other Facebook comments. We'll bounce around and look at some of the other comment sections here, too. Chris Pierce says he thinks it's an example of Georgia playing down to its competition. Kirby's always preached that. They'll be good. I believe that you're probably right about that. We have a little bit of a track record here. I think that Georgia is in a weird spot as a program, and I think that has put those of us who are fans of Georgia or a media person like me who kind of does a show from the perspective of fans, kind of sort of facilitating a fan-oriented conversation here, I think we have a very weird job sometimes when we watch Georgia football. Most college football fans watch college football with the hopes that their team will win. That's the basic gist of almost every college football fan out there. They tune in on Saturday or they go to the stadium on Saturday with just the generic hope, I hope my team wins this game. But Georgia is so far past the idea of I hope my team wins that we start looking at other things to evaluate. And if you're Georgia, I think you start thinking about games, whether Kirby Smart admits this or not, I believe it's true. You start thinking about things beyond the stated goal of we just want to win. At Georgia, you expect to win, so it becomes about, from a fan standpoint of, well, how pretty did you make the win look? From a Georgia evaluation standpoint of how many guys did we learn about today? How perfect were we? And obviously when perfection is your standard, you're always going to fall short. And once fans kind of move past the idea of just winning alone not quite being enough, well, you're kind of set up for disappointment more Saturdays than not. And, ultimately there are maybe, and I'm trying to be as candid as I possibly can here, there are maybe 5 teams that could even stay within a touchdown of Georgia. So when you're not playing one of those teams, it's simply a matter of, well, how focused is Georgia going to be today? How ready to play are they going to be today? Do they do something to make it easier for the opponent? And that's just kind of a weird place to be. Most college football fan bases, most college football teams will never get there. But that's obviously where Georgia is right now. And I think from time to time, I think that was certainly the case after last week's season opener, maybe a little bit less so after today's. But nonetheless, there are some remnants of this. It just creates a little bit of a weird vibe when you're judging a team on more than just did they win the game. We'll give you an injury update here. We saw Javon Bullard leave this game. Ankle sprain, it's being reported here for Bullard. Severity uncertain on that. He says one thing he knows is that Bullard could not return to today's game. So oftentimes Kirby Smart will say, hey, we could have gotten him back if we needed to. Today, though, Javon Bullard, Kirby Smart says, would not have been able to return for today's game. So that's a big deal right now. Bullard and Makai Starks had a wonderful interception today. We're going to talk more about him in a moment. Bullard and Starks give Georgia about as good a safety tandem as anybody has in college football right now. But if Bullard is dealing with an injury that's going to sideline him, that's a pretty big loss for a UGA defense. Bullard was perhaps Georgia's most important defensive player in the college football playoff going back to last year. I'll give you a couple other things from Kirby Smart here. He says all 3 phases contribute, and he credits the practice this week for the improvement. He says possibly the best Monday and Tuesday, Wednesday in my 8 years here. Now, for those of you who are kind of leaned in on this and trying to figure out what's going on here with Georgia, what would you rather have? A Saturday in which you got plenty of highlights and lots of entertainment from the word go, or a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday? They talk about bloody Tuesdays and the intense physicality of those practices. A situation like that where Georgia, according to Kirby Smart, are the best practices they've had since he's been here. I think you're a UGA fan, even though that took place away from your watchful eye. You weren't able to see that. We're not able to evaluate that. I think you'll take that as pretty good news that Kirby Smart had that many kind of things to say about the Georgia practices. Also a little bit from Carson Beck here, talking to ESPN after the game. He says, I felt good. I felt comfortable. I felt confident as well. I thought we executed at a high level. He said, we did what we wanted to do today. Coach Bobo called the plays, and we executed. He says, I thought everything was better as an offense. We moved the ball better. We ran the ball better. We threw the ball better. I think for the most part that's kind of true. A little bit of a slower start, but I think a pretty good day all the way around. Jeff Sentell's got some thoughts. We're going to hear those from him coming up in a moment. While we're getting ready to get Jeff on the show, let me also get ready to give a shout-out here to our player of the game here, presented by the J. Stein Law Firm. Congratulations goes out to Makai Muse, who walks away with player of the game honors here for today. Great job by Muse, who gives Georgia the huge spark for special teams, the kick return to begin the game, good field position, and the punt return for a touchdown, something that Georgia had not done since 2016. Our player of the game, presented by the J. Stein Law Firm, is Georgia do it all man right now. Slot receiver, kick returns. Makai Muse. He is our player of the game, presented by the J. Stein Law Firm, as voted on by folks at DawgNation.com here today. And, of course, our player of the game, I said before, brought to you by the J. Stein Law Firm. And if someone you love, or if it's you yourself, has been injured in an accident because of something that someone else did to you, you can look no further than our friends at the J. Stein Law Firm to make you whole and get you the compensation that you deserve. Not only is Josh Stein a double dog, graduating from the UGA Law School, he's also got over 20 years of experience handling injury cases, perhaps just like the one you may be dealing with. So you're going to get that small firm attention. They have a lighter caseload. That means you're not going to just be like some sort of number or some sort of file to them. You're going to be an actual real person with actual real needs. They're going to provide that for you. That's why I want you to reach out to the J. Stein Law Firm right now. Online, it's jsteinlawfirm.com. That's jsteinlawfirm.com. We want to say thank you to the J. Stein Law Firm for bringing our player of the game to us here on our DawgNation Post-Game Show. We'll bring in Jeff Sentell here right now. Jeff down on the field today, too. Jeff, let me tell you what we've kind of said here thus far, and I want your thoughts of the game there, too. I had kind of called for a little faster start from Georgia on offense. Didn't really get that, and yet ultimately I don't think today was negative for the Georgia offense. I think that Carson Beck was more comfortable. I think Georgia showed a little bit more prowess, a little bit more potency on offense perhaps than it showed last week against UT Martin. We've talked about Makai Muse. I do think that Muse has kind of graduated beyond just being a good story right now. Yeah. I think that Muse right now is one of this team's most important players. You make case through 2 games, few players have seemingly been more important than Muse has been. We've had some fun with Dylan Bell at running back. Yeah. That's a very interesting weapon that Georgia might seem to employ. I think the overall takeaway is that this is a fan base very much ready to push the fast-forward button and get to SEC play next week. This is a team that needs to play an SEC game. This is a fan base that's ready to see an SEC game. That's kind of where we are. We're ready to flush the group of 5, ready to flush the FCS, and get to football that matters. So that's what our conversation has been here thus far. Let me bring you in now. Tell me some of your thoughts. We talked during the game a little bit, but tell our audience some of your thoughts about today's game.
Well, I mean, you had a lot of them. I thought, Brandon, we've graduated Makai Muse now from feel-good story to maybe one of the most dynamic weapons on the team. You look at the punt returns, you look at the advantages he gave him in field position. And, I mean, this guy, when you give him some green grass, he says it over and over in his press conferences. His job is to find green grass. And when he finds green grass, it's almost game over. I really like how, the players on the team continue to tell us, it's like, you guys haven't seen nothing from Makai yet, because they see Makai do that same stuff in practice to their All-American, All-World, All-SEC defense. And they're like, well, if he does that against us, he's going to do that against everybody. I do love how they love up on him after every big play, like it's some Disney movie moment, but he's graduated from being a Disney movie right now. He is an exclamation point player for the Dogs. The second thing I would take away from this game is I like the word settling in. Like a lot of people, when you watch Carson walk, if you got video from the dog walk, if you see pictures from the dog walk, I think both of those are on DawgNation.com right now. Carson Beck just looks a little bit nicer in his suit. Seems like he's settled in, and you see him on the field, and he looks a little bit more settled in, a little bit more calm, more of an operator, like he's guiding the offense. Dylan Bell's the guy. I know everybody's shocked about this running back stuff, but Brandon, I saw him score like 50 rushing touchdowns in high school. I asked Marcus Rosemy-Jacksain about it, and he's like, hold on, what? I just thought he was a receiver that could really run the ball. I was like, yeah, man, he had about 40 touchdowns in high school. He's like, what? So, like, Marcus, and one last final detail is I asked Marcus. Marcus is a guy that is an elder statesman on the team. He's seen good dogs. He's seen great dogs. He's seen championship dog teams. I asked him after the game, I said, Marcus, where do you think this Georgia football team is at? And he says, this is about where I thought it would be. And I says, I think it's where it needs to be right now. And I thought that was very telling when he said that.
It's interesting because obviously Marcus Rosemy-Jacksain, kind of one of the elder statesmen on this team, so his words carry a lot of weight there on that. To further the conversation you brought up, there's no doubt to me that Carson Beck, I would say, looked more settled, took a step towards being settled, but I don't think this was his coming out party as of yet. I wouldn't describe him as completely settled as the Georgia starting quarterback. I think he took steps towards that. I think he was better today than he was last week. But to me, scoreless first quarter is going to kind of hold you back a little bit from saying, yeah, man, this is his moment. He's the guy. The thing I've compared it to a lot on DawgNation Daily this week is when Stetson Bennett played UAB in 2021 and threw 5 touchdowns, that was the moment where he, even if we didn't realize at the time, that was the moment when he showed, hey, not only can I be a starting quarterback, I can be a great one. If Carson Beck's going to drop that hint sometime in September, these first 2 games haven't quite been that yet.
I mean, what did he start today? 15 out of 21. I like the ball to Cash Jones. I liked a lot of the ball he threw to Arian Smith. It seems like a couple of plays, a couple of steps, and that's a 40-yard gain versus a touchdown. You just see Carson. Like, I've been around him for a long time. I saw him today. I saw him afterward. I actually saw him leaving the post-game interview, scrum or whatever, and I just gave him a big thumbs up. And he was like, yeah, it almost feels like he's a lot more comfortable. He's walking the walk now as being the Georgia quarterback. I can't believe we've talked this long, Brandon. We can talk all this offense, warts, clean it up, fix it up. This defense, Brandon. You know, everybody talks about the standard is the standard. Yeah, here's the standard. You're probably only going to get 17 points against Georgia most nights unless you have a Heisman Trophy quarterback. So you better make those count. And, I mean, you see the reload here. You see Raylan Wilson, C.J. Allen. I thought the defense looked crisper with Smile Munden Jr. in there. And let's face it, he started so many ball games last year, played championship-level defense, was a preseason All-SEC, preseason All-American for some folks. Some folks think he's going to be a first- or second-round draft pick. He's back, and I think that makes Georgia a little bit better. Most of the fan base that I talk to and I know really well, my phone's been blowing up with, what's up with Javon Bullard? How's he? Everybody wants to know about that. I think that's probably a big takeaway. Another big takeaway is Georgia scores 31 points in the second quarter. You know, the last time they did that was the 35 they put up against Vanderbilt in 2021 when they could have put up 135 against Vanderbilt that day. I think you see what they're doing now. You see the pieces of everything coming together. And, Brandon, big takeaway. Brock Bowers had 2 touches and maybe 8 total yards today. So that was the engine everybody knows Georgia could go to, and they really didn't have to tap that well today.
So you touch on a lot of things there. I want to kind of talk about some of this. You know, one of my real positives from the game today, I thought at the beginning, I agree with you, Georgia looked better on defense with Smile Munden in there. And, frankly, I was pleasantly surprised to see how healthy that Munden looked to be. I don't know that I quite had him being this healthy by week 2, at least by appearances. This was a very healthy player for Georgia. It was a better defense because of that, so I completely agree with you. The other thing that I'll say about this Georgia defense, and you're right, we're waiting on, you know, more substantial updates on the status of Javon Bullard. That's going to be important over the course of the next few weeks. But his compatriot there in the safety, you know, category for Georgia, Makai Starks, the interception that Starks had today was the kind of thing that Starks does so well. The amazing highlight. It reminded me of the interception he had against Oregon last season. And, I mean, I think that Starks has his hand in the air right now more so than anybody else, even more so than Mikael Williams right now at the moment. I think he's got his hand in the air more so than anybody else to say, I'm the next superstar player in this Georgia defense. Because, listen, sometimes it's Jalen Carter, a defensive lineman. Sometimes it's Roquan Smith, an inside linebacker. Sometimes it's a defensive end or an outside linebacker. Can be a safety. It's been different guys at different positions. Right now, I think that Makai Starks is the face of this Georgia defense. That could change before the season is done. But for the moment, I believe that Starks is the face of this Georgia defense.
You know, I like that point. Let me take you where I think. When I really get into my head, when I analyze Georgia year after year and I try to figure out how these teams are different, how these teams are better, I've got a little matrix in the back of my head. And if you flash a couple times a year on this defense, you might be a first-round draft pick. You might be a second-round draft pick. But if you flash every game, which is what Makai Starks is doing right now, you could become a Georgia great. That's what Nakobe did. That's what Roquan Smith did. That's some, David Pollock juice going on there. Every game the young man shows up and plays so well. He's gotten so much bigger. He plays behind his pads now. He's still the lightning bolt athlete that deserves to be in the Champ Bailey athlete category based on what he did in high school, comparative performances there. And he's really saying, you know what? I think I'm going to be an All-American in my second year, and let me put the tape out to prove it.
I want to read some comments here because I want to, make sure we get all voices heard from. Joe Garliardi is a terrific commenter on DawgNation.com. A little bit critical of today's game. He says, that was ugly. He says, turnovers are nice, but they can't be relied upon. Offense just sputtered, another ugly game, and the second and third defense didn't play to the whistle. There were a lot of guys moseying around after it looked like the ball carrier was taken care of. Sloppy. I think that Joe's a terrific commenter. I think he's probably more critical of this game than I'm going to be. I agree with his point that if you're kind of evaluating Georgia for the positive because a ball bounced off a player's foot and landed in Chaz Chambliss' hands, you're right. You can't count on that each and every Saturday. But the Starks interception, the kind of thing that I would say that Georgia went out and made happen. Overall, I don't know that I can be that hard on the second and third team defense. Maybe Joe saw some stuff that I didn't see. But ultimately, this is what 45-3 I think looks like against a team that didn't belong in the same stadium as Georgia. To me, I'm going to be more critical of the fact this game is even still played. Obviously, Georgia was supposed to beat Oklahoma. We know the backstory there on that. Frankly, this is much better than what UT Martin was a week ago. I mean, to me, this is just sort of what 45-3 looks like, where I do think if you're a coach, you're having to fight to keep everybody's head in the game, everybody focused on the task at hand. There were some moments, I guess, of sloppiness here, but I mean, I think if you kind of do a beauty contest between this Saturday's game and last Saturday's game, I believe this Saturday's game passes that test more so than last week's did. Do you agree with that?
Sometimes, Brandon, I agree with you on that. But sometimes, Brandon, I think there are people that will go to Thanksgiving dinner at Grandma's house, and they will complain about the sweet potato pudding.
Yeah, but Joe's a good commenter.
But like I'm saying, I feel like people want to sit there and pick at things. And, like, the mantra is, like, better never rest. And, of course, that wasn't a slap into your comment whatsoever. But it seems like in these victories where Georgia doesn't score 31 in the first quarter, they only score 31 in the second quarter. People are like, okay, are there chinks in the armor? Are they there yet? If I had to dabble into negative Nancy Town, I had to get in that lane. Don't do it really often. But I would say the offensive line, I think, is a work in progress. And I think, it's week 2. Your offensive line should not be world beaters yet. And I know people are saying, hey, Jeff, look at the starts between those guys from tackle to tackle. A lot of starts. But, when I really look at it, I think sometimes you look at that offensive line and I see Stacey Searles, they're trying something. I see Jared Wilson in there early at guard. Looks like Jared Wilson got some of maybe, Xavier Truss's snaps or Micah Morris's snaps. You see Jared Wilson early as a center. You see Dylan Fairchild in there. What's the mantra, Brandon? Better never rest for this program. And although that offensive line and that group should be better than everybody else in the SEC, they're not resting. They feel like very important point in the game. Georgia's on like 1st and goal, 3rd and goal, something like that, and they bring in everybody. And they take a timeout. The offensive line comes over, and he's like, nobody's getting any movement. You're not moving anybody. He was, he gets effusive during games, and that's just naturally Kirby after seeing it for 7 or 8 and 9 years now. But this was a point, the very next play, I think they brought in 3 tackles, and they ran Kendall Milton behind that side because at some point they reach a bulldog point of pride where it's like, listen, guys, it's 2 yards.
That's another bulldog point of pride.
I got to bring that up, right? But, like, if you want to say this, the offensive line should be better. They should be getting more movement.
Yeah, Frederick Meredith, by the way, brought that up on YouTube. I was going to read his comment a minute ago. Frederick Meredith brought that up, and we had some guys on Facebook saying the same thing, Kevin Cook, that is probably one of the criticisms that does stick for today, right?
Yeah, because, again, people look at it and they say, look at this. Cedric Von Granger might be the number 1 center in the country. Tate Ratledge has started all year now for the championship team. Same thing for Xavier Truss. You've got a new guy in Amarius Mims, and everybody thinks, oh, yeah, that's a first-round draft pick walking. And then you got Ernest Green III, who, let's not forget, he's a redshirt freshman, and he didn't play at all last year, and he's already been day 1 starter at left tackle for Georgia in back-to-back weeks. So, yeah, they got a lot of veteran ball players. But if veteran ball players don't move Ball State around like they should, and they don't move their week 1 opponent around like they should, then changes are going to be made, and Georgia's got a talented understudy at all those positions.
Michael Clayton on YouTube asked a good question. I think he's asking it seriously. He may have just been joking, but I believe he asked it seriously because I've kind of sort of dismissed a lot of this. Oh, it's just Ball State, who cares? It's just UT Martin, who cares? And so what Michael asked on YouTube, and I think it's a fair question, says, okay, well, BA, when does Georgia's play actually start to count? Like at what point in the season does what Georgia does actually matter? I think it's a fair question. And for me, the answer to that question is next week against South Carolina. I'll tell you why. This is a team that Georgia plays every single year. And I don't know that Georgia has looked more like a national champion at any point in its national championship years than its 2 games against South Carolina.
Especially early.
Now, maybe that's a coincidence. Maybe that's Kirby not liking Shane Beamer. Maybe there's all kinds of mitigating factors there. But last year, Georgia may have played a better game at South Carolina than it played against Oregon. I actually think it probably did play a slightly more complete game against South Carolina than it played at Oregon. And they completely demolished them in 2021. Shane Beamer had the very funny line about there's 5 stars all over the field. I think next week's a really interesting measuring stick from Georgia. And here's what I can tell you. For people who don't think that I'm showing enough concern about whatever the issue is, that Georgia fans want to be concerned about, and I'm trying not to dismiss it. I'm actually choosing only negative comments to read because I'm trying to counterbalance what I think from Jeff and me is mostly a positive assessment of the game. I'm actually seeking out negative comments to read because I want to kind of counterbalance that a little bit. But as God is my witness, I can promise you, if Georgia wins 27-21 next week, I'm not going to be hunky-dory, everything's fine, for 2 reasons. A, because it will show a step down from where Georgia's been against the same opponent, compared to the last 2 years. But also, South Carolina did not handle itself well against UNC a couple of weeks ago. Now, in all of college football, the same team never shows up 2 weeks in a row. We understand that. So South Carolina is certainly capable of playing way differently against Georgia than against North Carolina, but outcomes of games have to matter towards something. Everything about next week, Georgia's history against the Gamecocks, South Carolina's recent history this season, everything about that tells you that Georgia ought to beat South Carolina as badly as it beat Ball State today. And if it doesn't, at that point in time, then I might be willing to say, ooh, this right now does not look like a two-time national champion cakewalking its way to a third. But I have a sneaking suspicion that conversation won't need to be had. I truly believe that next week is one of those games like, oh, it's 3:30. It's a team we've heard of. It's some guys we don't like. There's some bragging rights here. Georgia's going to fight a major recruiting battle in the class of 2025 with South Carolina. I think that's the recipe for, hey, playtime's over, chin straps buckled up tight. I think that Georgia throttles South Carolina next week. But if they don't, then I'll be more than happy to stand here in this same spot at the UGA bookstore and say, this is a team right now that does feel a little bit different.
So let's get a little real talk, BA. Let's act like there's a Pilsner there, there's a highball there, and we're just among friends, right? What part of you says that we might get to the SEC championship game and people might not know what Georgia has? I mean, let's say they beat South Carolina by 21. Let's say they beat Auburn by 17. Let's say they beat Kentucky by 20. They keep Ole Miss. They beat them by 35. I think there'll be people saying, well, do we really know what this football team has yet? I think it's a product of just being on this pedestal now where everybody expects so much of this team. And luckily, I don't think any fan expects more than Kirby Smart and that staff because that man seems like he bursts a blood vessel. You see it now all the time down on the sidelines, but it seems like he bursts the blood vessel every 4 or 5 snaps or 4 or 5 reps with his team. I just think with this football team, like there's football guys I know, and is it the final score that matters or is it how you got there? What's the DNA of that final score? And then you could say, well, if I see repeated final scores where the game wasn't that close or the game was much more in doubt, then they start to worry about things. I see a quarterback that Georgia's gotten, Carson Beck, that's performing very well. I know he's not all SEC yet. He's not what everybody thinks he can be. But through 2 games, I think the Carson Beck report card would probably look like a B. And I think you see a semblance of a running game that's still trying to spark up. They're trying to get Dylan Bell, a former high school running back, a former high school utility player, to give them some sort of burst in the running back position. I get that. There's some misfires there with their offensive line. There's all that. But that's why you play all these games and have all these practices so you can try to get these guys better. Folks, if you're worried about this football team, here's when you want to worry about it. When they can drop Ladd McConkey into that offense and Marcus Rosemy-Jackson into that offense, and then you can see what you got. And it's maybe not the results everybody was expecting, or it doesn't look like the Oregon game of 2022, or doesn't look like the South Carolina game in either one of those years. I think that's the time for folks to start wondering about if this year's team is a little off. I'm not in that group yet.
Corey Stinchcomb on Facebook bringing up the play of Kendall Milton today, a little bit dissatisfied with the Georgia rushing attack. This is one of those things I'm going to take a little bit of a hunch on. Kirby last week said that Kendall wasn't 100% healthy yet. Haven't seen Dejon Edwards play at all yet this season, right? Yeah. I mean, he didn't play today, right?
No, he did not.
Yeah. This is another thing where, I do feel like when Edwards is back, when Kendall's fully healthy, I still think this is going to end up being a tandem of backs that's going to remind you a little bit of what Georgia would have had in 2021 with Zamir White and James Cook, what they had a little bit last year with, kind of Kenny McIntosh, obviously kind of leading the way there. It's probably not Elijah Holyfield, DeAndre Swift in 2018. It's probably not, certainly Nick Chubb, Sony Michel, kind of a college football Hall of Fame tandem. It's probably not that, but will Georgia end up, I think, in a similar spot from a rush offense standpoint to where it was the last couple of years? I still sort of think that's the case, and I'm not trying to, I guess carry water here, but I don't think we've seen the best of Kendall Milton yet. I don't think. I mean, this is a guy that's kind of led Georgia, in yards per carry. I know he did last year. I think he may have last couple of years. I mean, I think there's a better version of Kendall Milton than what we've seen for these first couple of games.
Well, he tries really hard. Nobody more than Kendall and wants to get ready and to help Georgia and bring Georgia to greatness. I still remember the young man when we were covering him in recruiting, and he said, not just one natty, but natties. And that's happened in his high school, from his high school matriculation now at Georgia. He did call sort of that shot. I'm going to say this, Brandon. I'm curious to hear your opinion. Let's face it. Before the season started, let's call Georgia a boxer. And Georgia always had that dominant right hand, and that was the run game. And this was the year where the left hand was going to be stronger. It was the passing attack. It was Dylan Bell. Ra Thomas continuing to look a lot better. Ra Thomas is starting to turn into a guy that's really going to help Georgia a lot. But everybody thought that the passing game was going to be the strength of this offense, or at least the most dynamite part of this offense. And now, but do you think that people assume that same running game, that same right hand was always going to be there, and now when it's not, that's cause for concern? I mean, remember, folks, I think we're all in agreement here. Everybody thought the passing game, Bowers, remember all those projections, 3,500 yards for the passer, 4,000 yards for the passer, 35 touchdowns for the passer. I think everybody expected the running game not to be the alpha part of the offense, but I guess they expected it to be there. And I'll be honest, I'll be frank, I don't think the same Georgia running game is going to be there. I don't see Kenny McIntosh. I think it all depends on Dajon Edwards. If Dajon Edwards is a guy that you can pull the bubble wrap off, and he's going to look like he's going to have 7 carries for 70 yards and 3 catches for 60 yards and a touchdown and moving the chains a lot, I think that's another missing dynamic of this offense.
So I want to be extremely candid about this Georgia rushing attack in a moment, and just kind of plainly admit something here in a minute. We'll do that here. Let me also give a quick shout out to my friends at Cercheros before we do. Some of y'all were giving me a hard time last week. In my Georgia accent, you were saying I wasn't saying Cercheros right. So this week I want to make sure that I say Cercheros correctly, because honestly, every now and then, the Northeast Georgia does kind of come out in me a little bit. So I want to make sure I say this appropriately, Cercheros, because it's a great place when you're thinking about getting your game day catering party taken care of. You're doing the big tailgate outside, or perhaps a lot of folks coming over to the house to watch games, and hopefully you're tuning into our DawgNation Post-Game Show after all of that. Either way, as you're getting ready to do that, we hope that you'll use Cercheros for all your game day needs, because they've got everything from a burrito party platter to a taco fajita bar, and they got freshly grilled meats, guac, queso, and all your favorite fresh toppings. Listen, I could go for some cheese dip right now, some queso dip. I could go for that so much right now. And Cercheros would certainly be an awesome choice, because they got 25 locations throughout the state, including, of course, right here in Athens, Georgia. They got you covered. Dine-in, pick-up, delivery, and catering. Cercheros is your game day guarantee for fresh mex. Visit Cercheros.com, and you can find a location near you. I believe I said it that right. Cercheros. Cercheros.
Very dignified.
Yeah, not Northeast Georgia. Cercheros. It's Cercheros. Cercheros. Well, hold on. No, I got to say something. I teased something a moment ago. You got to let me pay off on the tease.
All right.
So let me pay off on this tease, and you can say whatever you want. So here's the thing about the Georgia running game. I'll be very honest, and I wouldn't typically say this, but it's late on a Saturday. We're kind of in a looser mood. I've been listening closely to the stuff that Kirby Smart's been saying about Kendall Milton, because I've been trying to get a hint of how does Kirby feel about all this right now. Because I'm going to be honest here. Now, I'm not going to tell you who I'm talking about, but I think there have been a few moments over the years in which Kirby has said something during a press conference that I think was meant as a challenge for a player from time to time about various things. I think every now and then Kirby kind of says something where if you read between the lines, that may have been about so-and-so. And I'll leave that to you to kind of decide, from time to time who that might be. But in the case of Kendall Milton, I kind of wondered, is there any frustration here by the fact that, Kendall's been banged up and not able to go through spring practice, not able to go through a lot of fall camp, the fact that last week was kind of what Kirby called his version of a summer scrimmage because he had not participated during the month of August. Think about the stuff that Kirby Smart has said about Kendall over the course of the last few weeks, how hard he's working, how much he wants to win, how bad he wants this. I mean, really, all of this stuff is archived on the DawgNation YouTube page. You can go back and watch it, and I have been listening carefully because, listen, I'm not a player. I'm not a medical training person. I don't know the nature of injuries, things like that. I'm kind of interested in what the vibe is, and the vibe is that Kendall's doing everything he can to be as healthy as he possibly can be, and that I think the belief is from Kirby that when he is fully healthy, he's going to be a very important player from Georgia. So when you don't see that running game fully coming together right now, I mean, I'll go back to Dell McGee in the summertime. The one time we heard from Dell before the start of the season, he said, I am very confident in my running back room. I saw him on the field today, had a big smile on his face. That looks like a guy who's pretty happy right now with what he's got going on. Kirby Smart saying very good things about Kendall Milton. I think this coaching staff believes in this running back room. We haven't seen it yet, and obviously the results are what matters. The proof will be in the pudding one way or another. But I think this is a Georgia coaching staff that likes its running back room, even perhaps maybe more so than some Georgia fans maybe do.
I think, what is it? It's kind of a shell game. You know that popular shell game they play in the stadium? I think this point must be made. And I don't know if you've said it on your shows. I don't know if you said it already today. But this is like a mathematical equation in my mind. Offensive line not getting pushed, not getting movement. And here's the big one. Lean in real close. Darnell Washington is not a factor in this run game anymore. And I think that's a big thing Georgia's missing off the past season. I mean, let's face it, Darnell Washington was a glorified left tackle or an All-American type blocker. And then also you want to add in the caveat that Georgia's first-team veteran personnel is not on the field. So I think these three things are part of this stew that makes the running game not taste so nice right now.
I think that's probably a pretty fair point. We'll get some more of your comments here, and then we'll get ready to wrap up and get ready for tonight. So excited about Texas, Alabama. I mean, to be honest with you, I've been thinking all day long about going home, taking a shower, getting in front of the couch on the couch for the TV. Cannot wait for Texas, Bama tonight.
Now, do you start out with a beverage, or do you start out with some nachos? Do you start out with some?
Listen, don't you worry about what I'm going to do. How about that? Don't you worry about what I'm going to do. Listen.
Kick your feet up in your Brandon Adams lazy boy chair. Dream about being on a boat somewhere. You can float somewhere. That's what I mean. Get his sailor's hat on as he does this. One thing I got to say this. When I walked in here, I'm a little sensory overload because I've made the mistake of not going into this University of Georgia bookstore in about a year and a half. You know how it is when you don't go in the bookstore?
All kinds of gear, no doubt.
You're like, oh my gosh, hide the wife, hide everybody else, because otherwise you're gonna walk out of here and the MX bill is gonna be somewhere like close to 4 figures. But I'm walking around and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's the new night. I mean,
good looking stuff.
I mean, nobody told me to do that. Nobody paid me to do that. That was a free one right there. But when you haven't been in the bookstore in a while, it's almost like, my wife, whenever she goes into Target and the fall stuff is not put out yet, and it finally is, and she's getting pumpkin everything. That's kind of what it feels like.
Yeah, absolutely, that's the case. By the way, we had some folks on YouTube asking about our Zoom calls. Mentioned this a couple times. I'll mention it again for those who may have joined us late. You guys know we've had a mess lately. Thankfully, we're able to be live today, but the trade-off for being live is we're not able to take those Zoom calls. So hopefully by next Saturday for a bigger SEC game. Listen, we kind of talk about is Georgia in, full, playing shape, ready to go for SEC play. The question needs to be asked, is DawgNation ready for SEC play? We've had studio issues, streaming issues, technical issues, can't take Zoom calls today. But by next Saturday, we're going to be just like this Georgia Bulldog team. We're going to be fired up, ready to go. Game face is going to be on. Better never rest. You better believe that's going to be our case. Full steam ahead for all of that.
Are you going to look at that technology beast in the face and say, don't you worry about me? Don't you worry about me, like you just talked about your post-game activity?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, that's the case. All right, let me do a couple comments before we get there, though. Frank Patterson says, I'm going to be drinking a Finnish long drink watching the Shriners. Absolutely. I'm going to be popping a top on a peach-flavored version of the Finnish long drink, sipping on that, watching the Alabama dynasty come to an end once and for all tonight.
Is that what you're going to call it tonight? You're going to call it tonight?
Oh, yeah.
Man, I think they're going to win, man.
Do you really?
I'm sorry. I think they're going to win big. Again, I got a moment here. What has Texas done? Texas hasn't done anything. They're not even a top 15, top 20 team. Well, they're a top 20 team, but they're not a top 10 team. You look at their record. You look at what they've done since the moral victory last year with Quinn Ewers in Alabama. They lost 4 more games. I don't know. And listen, almost seems like cliche, but every year Texas is supposedly back, right? Texas is always back every year.
But to me, the issue here is, well, I'll do this. I don't mind. The issue here is Alabama has slipped. And the game against Texas a year ago is an example of that. Keep this in mind. Not everybody cares about point spreads, but point spreads are a projection. So keep in mind the projection here. A year ago, you're talking about Alabama on the road. Were they about a 17-point favorite, something like that? 17-point favorite on the road. They're lucky to win the game. You're talking about playing here right now. Now Alabama in its own stadium is only about a 7-point favorite. I mean, the folks who put their money where their mouth is, they're telling you here right now, this is not the Alabama team that once was. Bryce Young's not walking through that door. Will Anderson Jr. is not walking through that door. Certainly players capable of winning national championships, something that neither one of those two guys did. They're not walking through that door right now. I just don't think this is the same Alabama.
I think the weaknesses of Alabama right now are on the lines and on the lines of scrimmage. That's where they've missed a lot in recruiting. A lot of those 5 stars, a lot of those players that were All-Americans that were supposed to play like All-SEC are not doing so. I think if Texas wins the game, it's going to be a skill guy game. It's going to be receivers. It's going to be throwing the ball in the air. And I think that's where Alabama has more of its strength there. And you made a point a minute ago that's like, so when Alabama is down, a Tennessee, an LSU, a Texas A&M can beat them. I don't know if Texas's football team has operated at the levels of those teams were over the last 2 or 3 years.
All right, can we do this? We got to do some scores before we leave. Can I just read a few comments? I'm gonna read the comment. I'm gonna let you say like 1 or 2 sentences in response.
Sure.
We're gonna try to go rapid fire here just for a moment. Frank Patterson says that if Javon Bullard can't go, Dan Jackson's got plenty of experience. Been nice the last couple of weeks to see Dan Jackson back playing football again, hasn't it?
It's great. Don't overlook David Daniel Sisvana. He looked great today as well.
We're going with Sisvana, aren't we? Just Sisvana?
Yeah, but don't overlook that guy, and also don't overlook Jonel Aguero.
Bernard Gilbert brings up David Daniel Sisvana. on one particular play, and Bernard's bringing this up, at least one that I saw, he laid lumber.
He's always been a guy that can hit. I mean, like his thing, you saw him at Woodstock High School. Shout out Woodstock, first win in 3 years. This past weekend, broke a 23-game losing streak. But he's always been a hitter. And you're gonna sit there, and I think, Brandon, I think one of the greatest parts of Georgia's team, the way it's currently built, is the depth is really there. They can take an injury here, an injury there, and they can be just fine. Think about this. If Bullard does miss some time, you've got a guy in Dan Jackson who started for the Dogs in 2021 and the national championship run that's still on the roster. Who else can go to that?
Roger Allen Martin on some of the offensive either decisions by Beck or play calling by Bobo. He thought there were too many sideline kind of horizontal passes to begin the game today. Do you agree with that?
Maybe there are too many, but he couldn't get any push up front. The guys weren't moving anybody up front, so sometimes that's what you got to do. You put the ball in the hands of your best playmakers.
Greg Childer says he guarantees that Alabama's going to try to take Quinn Ewers out of the game. Watch the hits tonight and the face masks. You think Dallas Turner in this Alabama pass rush is good enough to get after Ewers? And keep in mind, if this becomes a game of backups, because let's face it, Jalen Milrow's not any good. If this becomes a game of backups, if Ewers gets knocked out, not only does Texas have the better starter in Quinn Ewers, I know Malik Murphy. If Alabama had Malik Murphy, it would be all which is the Texas backup. All we'd be doing is hearing about how he's going to win the Heisman Trophy and stuff like that. That's the thing that ought to be alarming for Alabama, is how many teams have a backup quarterback better than Alabama does, including the team that plays right over there.
I would say this: if you knock Quinn Ewers out, you might better be ready for what you're going to get, that type of medicine, because I think Malik Murphy would be an excellent quarterback for Texas.
By the way, Rodney White brings up a pretty good point that knocking the starting quarterback out of the game is the only way that Alabama ever beats Texas.
Oh, my word. It goes all the way back. Did you see that rhetoric in that theater all this week about how that was a wormhole and that kept Texas from assuming its dynasty? That one hit by Marcel Darius where, like, he could barely move his arm and he kind of thought he was in next week. And everybody starts doing those what-ifs. And if he doesn't get knocked out, what would happen? I think I subscribe to the theory. I remember Alabama running all over Texas in that game. I think they had 2 100-yard rushers in that game.
Come on, Colt McCoy not playing is a big deal. I mean, listen, I'm an SEC homer, but Colt McCoy not playing. We're going to now relitigate a 2009 football game, but Colt McCoy not playing is a big deal.
Well, but Colt McCoy didn't play nose guard or middle linebacker. He wasn't stopping those running backs going into the end zone. Maybe the score was 34-31, but, like, Alabama was running all over Texas. Let's not forget that.
Greg Childer's also bringing up some of the, what he kind of calls unrealistic fan expectations. It dovetails back to something you brought up a moment ago, Jeff, which is I don't know if the nature of Georgia's schedule causes a problem for the team. I suspect it probably doesn't. I do think it makes it harder for fans. Not having an Oregon, not playing Oklahoma this week, which Georgia should have been doing, had the SEC not stepped in. We are football fans. Jeff and I are arguing about a football game from 2009. That's how football fans show their love. Yeah, football fans show their love for football by picking something, arguing about it. It doesn't even really matter which side of the argument you're on. You just sort of pick a side and argue it. That's how we show our love. And games like the last 2 weeks, you got to try to find something to talk about because this is how we participate in the sport of football. We talk about it. But the opponents are so, measly. They just don't give you, much to talk about. And so I think it creates, I would say, an artificially negative conversation because you're not playing a team interesting enough where the outcome seems to really matter.
Can I ask a question? I need you to educate me on this. Professor Brandon here. What if this game was 38-22 today? Remember,
I still wouldn't care.
No, but remember what the score was at the end of the first quarter?
0-0.
0-0. So why didn't last year's 38-22? I pulled that number not out of my air, but that was the score of the Kent State game. What were those shows like after that? I mean, were people like cruise control, no big deal, or why was that not a problem when that happened?
Well, I think the difference is, it's a very fair question. Here's what I think the difference is you saw those games take place after Georgia had already had 2 resounding outcomes that showed you how good it was. Georgia played better than anybody through the first 2 weeks because, remember, concurrent to Georgia demolishing Oregon, and we're going to wrap up the show here in a minute, but concurrent to Georgia demolishing Oregon and demolishing South Carolina, you had Ohio State that scuffled with Notre Dame. You had Alabama that scuffled with Texas. So the 2 teams that were, to begin the season, ranked ahead of Georgia, they actually played poorly in the first 2 weeks last year, whereas Georgia demolished. It was after the first 2 weeks of the season that we started talking about go for 2-22. That's when that kind of came up of, hey, this is a real thing. Georgia can win the national championship again here this year. And so when you're struggling against Kent State, which Georgia did, struggling against Samford, which Georgia did, almost lost to Missouri, you at least had the comfort of, but we know how good Georgia can be when it's at its best. this year, I just think the games come in a different order. I believe next week is going to be that reminder of, oh, yeah, this is what Georgia is, still the best team in college football. But until those moments happen, there is a little bit more angst around some of the other performances.
I'll give you a news flash into my – I don't know if we're going to know what Georgia has for a very long time, Brandon. I don't know if the resounding Kentucky, resounding South Carolina, resounding Tennessee, maybe resounding Tennessee after you've gotten through the gauntlet of the year, but there's going to be a lot of what does Georgia really have this year, and I think that's okay. I think that's okay considering that maybe they're not the best team in college football right now, but they have the best roster and program strength by far. And roster means pieces, available raw resources and materials to refine into something great. And the process of how Georgia refines it into something great is working as well as anywhere in college football right now. There's depth at the quarterback spot. Like sometimes when I look at a football team and I want to see, is this a really great team? Is this a championship team? Can it take a shot across the bow at a position and lose a key asset? And how would they be? How would they function? That's one of the things about this Georgia football team. They're taking shots across the bow, or they're taking shots to the solar plexus right now at the running back spot. Their veteran vaunted offensive line is not performing like it, not playing like it. So, I mean, I think those are things to look at with this Georgia football team. And, again, I come back to it. Everybody's going to waste a lot of airtime and a lot of talk time and a lot of headlines about the offense. This Georgia defense, you're going to have to get 17 to 20 points on this team no matter how much this offense misfires or is not what it say it was or whatever you want to say. I just think relatively these are things to talk about. But overall, when you look at that defense and what they're trying to put together on offense with a lot of those assets, again, if you're just joining the show, let me see Georgia's offense with Ladd McConkey and Dejon Edwards in there, and then we can talk. I think those are important missing pieces in terms of the beauty contest look of the offense right now.
I've got a final thought on Georgia looking ahead to next week to wrap things up. Prior to that, though, let's go cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. I'll give you a couple of scores here. Top 25 games of note. Clemson was struggling for a while. They're barely even in the top 25 anymore. Struggling for a moment with Charleston Southern. Seem to be pulling away now. You got Notre Dame, seemingly no trouble with NC State here at the moment. From the SEC, Ole Miss on the road, losing to Tulane right now, 10-7. It was announced just prior to kickoff today that Michael Pratt, the terrific quarterback from Tulane, who turned Florida down, which you always love that. Anybody that decides they don't want to be in games with Florida, that's a quarterback that I like. Pratt turned down the chance to transfer to Florida, but he's not playing today for Tulane. But the Green Wave still the lead over Ole Miss here at the moment. How about Kentucky and Eastern Kentucky 7-7? You know, Kentucky got off to a slow start last week against Ball State, and this is almost halftime. Kentucky's 7-7 with Eastern Kentucky, and they're almost at the half there. So Wildcats not exactly living up to the sort of. So let me give you a soapbox for like 5. Let me give you a soapbox for 5 seconds. Mark Stoops is what Dan Mullen used to be. When Mullen was at Mississippi State, it was like this is the people, the coach that people said they liked as